Hello and welcome to Red Read. Today I have the second of 3 end of the year videos. This one is going to be the 2023 Book Awards, where I highlight and talk about some of my favorite books within certain categories. And then at the end of this video I'm going to kind of turn 2020 forward and talk about some of my anticipated reads and themes for reading next year. A lot of these books have already made appearances as main videos on the channel, and so I will be a little bit more vague or not spend too much time talking about them because for the most part it's sort of assumed that there's already content about it. You know, if it's making it onto this list, I probably loved it enough to make a whole video about it. But yeah, some quick general stats for this year. I read about 61 books. It's about because I got some extra things in there like reading Shakespeare's sonnets and so on, but yeah, approximately 61 books and approximately 21,000 pages. And so that's not a bad reading year, I would say, but I would actually kind of correct myself and say it's a really good reading year when I consider the fact that if I read 61 books in 12 months, really I read 60 books in 9 months, because one book on this list that you're going to see and that I did make a video for took me 3 months to read. And so yeah, 60 books, 20 books a season is not a bad haul. So I'm happy about that. And yeah, did I do that maths right? 20 books a season? It would have been 80 books at normal rate. Wow. Oh my gosh. But anyway, let's get started with the surprisingly good reads. So, all of these reads are good, and a lot of the books that I read I sort of know are going to be good, but I'm always pleasantly surprised when something just kind of comes and baffles me. So the 3 books I selected this year as surprisingly good reads were Beowulf, translated by Seamus Heaney, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, and Satantunga by Laszlo Krasznahorkai. The only book of these that I didn't make a main video on was Woolf's To the Lighthouse, and just general impressions. I knew that I liked and respected Woolf's mind after having read her essay, A Room of One's Own, but seeing her fiction was definitely on another level. So it was a great treat to finally read this. My favorite reading accomplishments. So I went back and I looked at some of my, I kind of quickly read my plans bookshelf tour from last year, where I talk about the books that I wanted to read, and for a lot of it did line up, and but then of course some books kind of went in and out and I didn't actually get around to reading it. But for the most part, I would say that the kind of accomplishment that I failed to do, or decomplishment, was that I didn't get around to reading all of Leaf by Leaf's Western Core series, which I did really want to, but I actually read more of it than I thought, so I was happy about that. And I'll talk about some of the books because they are coming up a little bit later. My other reading accomplishment, I kind of committed to this maybe around February after I read his first work, but I was really glad that I got through and read all 5 of William Gaddis's books, his fiction books at least. I started with The Recognitions in February, and I think I finished Agape Agape in September, and yeah, it was definitely a sort of monumental experience, kind of living in Gaddis's world. I still want to go through and read his letters, which I have sitting on my desk, but yeah, I mean, I chose to read all of William Gaddis for a reason, and I decided to wear a little bit of a painting t-shirt today. I think Recognitions is got to be a #1 book of all time, so yeah, that was one of my favorite accomplishments, is getting through all of Gaddis's major works, or latest. But the other one, of course, is that I read the Bible this year. So it was kind of the critical decision whether or not, but before I went on vacation, whether or not I would splurge and get a Kindle so that I could kind of keep reading as normal, or if I just bring one book and read that, and I decided to bring one book. So yeah, I made a video on the Bible already, and so I won't talk too much more about it, but it was great to finally get around to it, because last year this was the only book I DNF'd, but I'll talk about the concept of DNFing in a moment, because last year I only read Genesis and Exodus, but yeah, it was great to go through and finally read all of it. Next up, this is the category, this is not books that I DNF'd. This is books that I've HNF'd, or H... Oh my gosh. This is books that I've NYF'd, not yet finished, because DNFing always feels like a conscious choice, like, you know, you're cancelling an author in your time, in your life, because, you know, you just don't want to read their books. But a lot of these, like all of these books I really, really wanted to read, but certain things got in the way, certain biblical things got in the way. The first is Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, and the second is Sylvia Plath's collected poems. I've now started bringing this to work and just reading this on lunch breaks, so yeah, I'm making some progress through it, but both of these books were basically the victims of being the books that I was reading in the last couple of days before my vacation, and then I just had to stop reading them, and I was away from them for, you know, 2 months and then 3 months, because I committed to finishing the Bible. With Blood Meridian, I got, I think, exactly 100 pages in. When I actually read it proper, I'm gonna just start again and read it all the way through. It's kind of funny that I had to give up Blood Meridian to start reading the Bible. And the other not yet finished is the Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy. This was almost one of my kind of regret reads that, or like regretted that I didn't get around to reading it at all, which is a category coming up later. But after reading Don Quixote, and I said I'm not reading any more books this year, I've rationalized as I'm not reading any more fiction books this year, and so I just started kind of working through a couple of these chapters, and I'm loving this so much. I can get that it's maybe not it feels a little bit opinionated at times, but I kind of like it, and I like that he has a great way of just summarizing some of the really it's making me realize maybe a Wittgensteinian sort of realization where you actually do get a lot of the philosophical concepts, but depending on the syntax they use when they present it to you, it could just obliterate your brain. And Bertrand Russell's got this great way of sort of just unfolding the Grecian knot, so to speak. And yeah, I've not yet finished it, but I'm going to just keep working at that. That's just a book that's sitting on my desk now, and I just pick through at my own leisure. Favorite new authors? So I've actually removed one category, so Gaddis would have been on this list if I hadn't finished all of his work. All of these authors are authors who I read for the first time this year and have been kind of compelled to go on and find and read more of their works, and I still have a desire to go and read more of their stuff. So the 4 authors that are on this list are Donald Barthelme, 60 Stories. This is just like... This is a literary daddy. David Markson's Reader's Block. As you can tell, I have a bit of an kind of proclivity for the postmodern. Virginia Woolf. As always, I've already complimented her. And Zadie Smith. I kind of regret not reading at least one more of her books this year, because I think I have an essay collection, Changing My Mind, and I know I also have NW and The Autograph Man lying around, and I want to buy The Fraud, but I know I'm actually going to give Zadie Smith the Gaddis treatment and the James Joyce treatment of just reading all of their works in chronological order. So the most unique books that I have selected, this is just 2 of them. There's Wittgenstein's Mistress by David Markson and The Loser by Thomas Bernhard. Next up, the best short story collection. I am going to give it to Donald Barthelme's 60 Stories. However, my favorite single short story, this is kind of a cheat, but if you know it, and you'll know why I've done this, Ryunosuke Akutagawa. It is The Life of a Stupid Man and Spinning Gears, read just side by side as if they're one story. They are autobiographical, and they are just... it was a really intense reading experience. Sort of the first being an autobiography of just 30-ish moments of extreme poetic intensity, and then the second one, Spinning Gears, being just 2 days of literal Dante-esque hell in the mind of a man who's kind of, unfortunately the victim of mental instability. The best essay collection is from the GOAT, Jorge Luis Borges. This is The Total Library, and the best essay. Now, there are a lot of really good essays in this, and I thought about A New Refutation of Time, or maybe one of his Dante-esque essays, but probably the essay that I keep thinking about just, at least once a week, is the essay Kafka and His Precursors, where Borges talks about spending a period wanting to write about Kafka and how he thought of Kafka as this very unique, he calls him unique as the phoenix of rhetorical praise. But then he goes and says that he discovered a couple of kind of references or precursors to Kafka, the first being Zeno's Paradox, the second being a fable by Han Yu, and the third being the writing of Kierkegaard. And the section that I highlighted, which keeps popping into my head, is, now I'm quoting Borges, "If I'm not mistaken, the heterogeneous pieces I've listed resemble Kafka. If I'm not mistaken, not all of them resemble each other. This last fact is what is most significant. Kafka's idiosyncrasy is present in each of these writings to a greater or lesser degree, but if Kafka had not written, we would not perceive it. That is to say, it would not exist." And then skipping a little bit, "The fact is that each writer creates his precursors. His work modifies our conception of the past as it will modify the future." Now, the best book purchases, I would recommend going and watching my video, UCID Book Fair Haul, or something along those lines, because I got some just incredible deals. The two that I've brought out to highlight is Maurice Blanchot's The Sirens' Song for $2, $2 Australian dollars, and the third is the second is On Ugliness, edited by Umberto Eco, that I got for $8. Most challenging reads of the year, you've already seen a couple of them, and I've already sort of thrown them onto my bed, so I'm not going to go and retrieve them, but would have to be The Recognitions, the Bible, and Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon. Challenging, but of course rewarding. The most fun books, without a doubt, A Naked Singularity by Sergio de la Pava, and Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. The best poetry collection I read this year was the complete works of Rainer Maria Rilke, and the best poem that I read this year is Song of Myself by Walt Whitman. New all-time favorite books. So I don't know if you know, but these are kind of wooden plaques that are lying around. I've got one here and one off camera here. They hold or they house some of my favorite books, and one that made its way as a permanent resident is The Notebooks of Malta Lordsbrigger. So I have 4 of those kind of scattered around. Other favorites include Borges's fictions and Nabokov's Pale Fire. So that's pretty much it in terms of books that I read this year. I'm now going to turn my attention to 2024 and just talk about, here's some of the books, some of my most anticipated books or authors. So here's some of my most anticipated authors, not necessarily these books, but just the people whose minds I really want to kind of stew in for a while. William T. Vollmann, didn't get around to reading him this year, but I just keep hearing so much about him. I don't know actually how interested I am in reading his Seven Dreams series, because it's just a lot of time to spend learning about the history of a country that I don't live in. But I'm definitely keen to read You Bright and Risen Angels quite soon. I mentioned this in my last video. It is a regret that I didn't get around to reading everything Beckett ever wrote. I did read Waiting for Godot this year, and I loved it. I want to read this trilogy very early next year. I regret that I didn't read any Proust this year. I was so hyped for Proust, but it just never came up, and I kept thinking, do I just splurge and buy the whole collection, and do I make that one of my 2024 reads? And I don't know, but I think at the very least I'm going to read this Lydia Davis translation first and just see where I'm at, maybe before I consider getting the whole collection. I also regret not getting around to Faust, and I really want to read this early next year. I talked with some friends, we might be making this a book club read. And also, a kind of brand new author that I learned about, learned about this year, that I'm just immensely excited to spend any time in his work, is William Blake. The only thing I knew about Blake before was just his paintings of Red Dragon, but then reading some of his poems, I realize that I'm going to be in the presence of a bit of a formidable mind, and so William Blake's someone I'm very excited to read next year. And the And so rather than saying, I'm going to read this book, I'm going to read this, blah, 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 I have 4 non-fiction books that I plan on reading next year. And if all else fails, if I can at least just get through these books, then I'll be happy and I'll think of the reading year as a success. The first is Fraser, or James Fraser's The Golden Bough. Of course, I got hip to this because of Gaddis's The Recognitions. The next one, continuing my theme of religious epics, is the Mahabharata I want to read. Next up, I really want to read The Second Sex, The Unabridged by Simone de Beauvoir. And the last big read that I want, the last kind of confirmed book that I want to read next year, I really want to read The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton. This is just, I know I've mentioned this and talked about this in a lot of other videos, but it just seems like such a me book, and so I just can't wait to read it. And lastly, finishing up, general themes for next year in terms of my reading is read more poems, read more non-fiction, read more female authors, read fragmentally. And so the first 3 I think are self-evident, but read fragmentally. The reason why I thought about this is I am a kind of monogamous reader, and so I don't multi-read books. But the problem with that is that there are a lot of books that I will kind of postpone or put off reading until I'm committed to reading it just top to bottom. And an example is like this Emily Dickinson, this beautiful Emily Dickinson collection that I want to just read a couple of poems from it and then put it down, put it back, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to kind of scan the ISBN, put it into the story graph, read it from this date and finish it, start on this date and finish it on that date, and just think that I kind of conquered or finished the book. I want to just have a supply or a kind of pool of books that I go in and out, study and read without kind of the need to or the desire to say I finished this book. I read 61 books this year. So I've kind of changed it, and I've tried to make sure that I have a collection of books that I'm not going to read, but I'm just going to kind of swim through and bask in, and that's sort of one of the biggest themes, is I don't want to be so quantitative next year with my reading, and I want to be okay with having read less, having a sort of smaller number or having a smaller number of completed books at the end of the year, but hopefully having read more pages. But that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching. The last book post-Christmas will be or like post all book hauls and whatnot, will be a bookshelf tour, and then we're going to get started with books in the new year. Thank you very much for watching.